What if the most famous female spy in history never actually spied for anyone? On October 15, 1917, a 41-year-old woman faced a French firing squad at dawn. Her name was Mata Hari, and history remembers her as the seductive double agent who killed thousands of Allied soldiers during World War I. But here's what the history books don't tell you. She was almost certainly innocent. The French government knew it, and they executed her anyway. The answer reveals one of the darkest conspiracies of the Great War conspiracy that turned an innocent woman into a scapegoat to hide France's catastrophic failures. This is the true story of Mata Hari. Before she became the world's most notorious spy, Margaretha Zelle was a girl from a small Dutch town with nowhere to go. At 18, desperate to escape poverty after her mother's death, she married a Dutch colonial officer 20 years her senior through a newspaper ad. Captain Rudolph MacLeod was an alcoholic who beat her throughout their marriage. In the Dutch East Indies, their young son died mysteriously, possibly poisoned, possibly by MacLeod himself. When the marriage collapsed, Margaretha returned to Europe divorced, penniless, and stripped of custody of her surviving daughter. She was 27 with no money and no options. So she reinvented herself completely. She moved to Paris and claimed to be a Javanese princess trained in sacred temple dances. She took the stage name Mata Hari, Malay for Eye of the Day. Performing nearly nude in exotic costumes, she became an overnight sensation. She wasn't a great dancer, but she had perfect timing. In an era obsessed with Eastern exoticism, she sold audiences a fantasy and became wealthy, performing for aristocrats and industrialists. And this is where the myth begins. Because a woman who used her sexuality and intelligence to gain wealth could only be one thing in the public imagination: dangerous. By 1917, France was drowning in blood. Over 1 million casualties, soldiers mutinying, no end in sight. The French military needed someone to blame for why they were losing. Spy hysteria swept the country. French counterintelligence became obsessed with the idea that exotic dancers and courtesans were passing secrets to Germany. It was easier to believe France was being betrayed by seductive women than to accept that their generals were incompetent. Mata Hari, with her exotic persona and wealthy lovers across Europe, became the perfect target. Here's what actually happened. In 1916, she briefly agreed to spy for French intelligence. Receiving the code H21, they asked her to seduce German officers for information. She tried, failed completely because she had no training, and gave them nothing useful. But French counterintelligence was intercepting German messages that mentioned an agent called H21. When they saw those letters, they assumed Mata Hari was a double agent. The problem: historians now believe the Germans deliberately used that code in messages they knew France could intercept. They were either referring to someone else entirely, or setting up a woman they saw as useless, someone France would waste time investigating while real German agents operated freely. France took the bait. On February 13, 1917, Mata Hari was arrested and charged with espionage, resulting in the deaths of 50,000 Allied soldiers. The number was invented. There was zero evidence connecting her to any military deaths. But France needed a spy, and they have found one. Her trial was designed to reach only one conclusion: guilty. Held in a closed military court with no public or press, she was assigned a 74-year-old former lover as her lawyer, a man with no military law experience, given weeks to prepare. The prosecution presented the intercepted German messages and the fact that she traveled frequently and received money from a German officer, but they couldn't present a single actual piece of intelligence she passed to Germany. Not one military secret. Nothing. They relied entirely on insinuation. They painted her as a seductress who extracted secrets from helpless men. They emphasized her exotic background, her multiple lovers, her provocative performances. In wartime France, being a sexually liberated woman was evidence enough. Mata Hari lied on the stand about her age and background, trying to maintain her mystique. She didn't realize how much danger she was in. She thought her fame would protect her. After 2 days, she was found guilty and sentenced to death. All appeals were denied. Here's the most telling detail. After her execution, French intelligence chief Georges Ledoux, the man who orchestrated her arrest, admitted in private correspondence that they had no solid evidence. A 1930s investigation revealed officials knew she was likely innocent but proceeded anyway. Why? Because France needed a victory, even if it was just shooting an innocent woman. On October 15, 1917, Mata Hari was taken to a military barracks outside Paris. Legend says she refused to blindfold and blew kisses to her executioners. The truth: she was terrified, barely able to stand. 12 soldiers fired. An officer delivered the final shot to her head. No one claimed her body, not her daughter, not her former lovers. French authorities gave her corpse to a medical school for dissection. Her head was preserved in the Museum of Anatomy in Paris. Then in 2000, archivists discovered it had vanished. To this day, No one knows what happened to Mata Hari's skull, but the mythology exploded immediately. Newspapers called her the dancer who killed 50,000 men. She became the ultimate femme fatale in books, films, and plays, a woman so seductive that entire armies fell because of her. It was all fiction, but it was fiction the world wanted to believe because the truth was too uncomfortable. France had executed a middle-aged exotic dancer to distract from military failures. They manufactured a spy out of a woman whose worst crime was being sexually autonomous and financially independent. They killed her not because she was guilty, but because she was convenient. The myth served a purpose. It reinforced that women's sexuality was dangerous. It gave people a simple villain for the horror of modern warfare. It let France claim they were eliminating threats rather than admitting incompetence. What do we know for certain? Mata Hari survived abuse, poverty, and loss. She created an elaborate persona to achieve independence. She briefly and incompetently tried spying for France, and she was executed for crimes she almost certainly didn't commit. Declassified documents show German intelligence files don't mention her as an agent. French archives reveal officials had serious doubts before the execution. Modern analysis suggests the Germans were deliberately misleading French intelligence. The most famous spy in history never spied for anyone. She was just a woman who refused to live by society as rules and paid for it with her life. What other historical villains were actually victims of propaganda? Let me know in the comments.